16-hour days of watching soccer are back. Premier League in action, but Major League Soccer is back. Opening weekend is here. It's going to be headlined, no doubt, by Inter Miami taking on LAFC. But what else is on your minds? What is catching your eye with MLS in 2026?
Well, okay, so you can see all the games. Again, 30 teams, tons of games every single weekend. MLS, not quite as married. Well, I guess you can see most of these are 7:30 local kickoffs. We do have an early game in St. Louis with St. Louis Charlotte. I guess that's the first game of the season, so get ready for that. Cincinnati Atlanta is happening at 4:45 Eastern time for some reason. Kickoff games at 45. What kind of aberrant nonsense is that? Then you get a bunch of 7:30 games, 8:30 games in the Central Time Zone. So we are still doing this mostly. They're in the same windows. I mean, there's a little bit of variance here. You get a couple of games on Sunday, as you can see, the Galaxy, NYCFC, and Seattle, Colorado. But Rob, I mean, look, we have this show is focused a lot on lower division soccer in America and the growth. And I do think that if we're talking about what is going to be the most transformative for soccer in the near future in this country, it is the lower divisions, right? And for the sake of this argument, it's probably USL because they have the momentum, they have the money, they have the experience, they have the plan, so to speak, right? They are popping up in towns across the country to talk to people about, hey, how can we put a soccer team in your town? They have a stadium, or maybe we'll build one. Like they're doing that thing. I mean, we're going to get into more of this soccer startup mentality later in the show in a fascinating way, but they're doing that, right? They're out there. The pure number of teams that the USL can launch through its divisions means that most of the growth in the near future is going to be driven by lower division soccer. But MLS matters, right? It's still very important how MLS does. And I just dropped my newsletter this morning. I do that on Fridays. It's Jason Davis Soccer Eagle. It's on Ghost. Go find it if you're interested in what I scribble down sometimes. And in addition to taking notice of media stuff that bothers me, after Matt Doyle last week, after we talked about that, found out that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had laid off Doug Robertson, who had been covering Atlanta United for a number of years as a beat reporter. We're losing beat reporters, like all over the place. And that's indicative of a couple things. Most of it's related to media and the business and newspapers, but a lot of it also is about soccer, because if there was demand at a high level for on-the-ground coverage of Atlanta United, would they be laying off Doug Robertson? Maybe not, right? Are they going to lay off their Atlanta Falcons reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution?
Less likely.
Less likely, right? And that. By the way, the AJC is now digital only, which is also a function of the era we live in. So that may be part of why Doug is no longer there. But I wrote about that, and I also talked about MLS and this idea that a World Cup bump could be coming, or sort of where MLS is in our cultural zeitgeist, right? Where MLS sits in importance in how we think about being American and specifically American sports fans. And I've been covering the league for 20 years, and I love MLS and its quirks and its irregularities and even sometimes its weird rules. And I've loved watching the league grow and pop up stadiums all over the country that were pipe dreams back in 96. There was nobody thinking we're going to have 30,000 seat stadiums for American soccer with an MLS team in Nashville, right? Nobody was thinking about that back in 96. So the growth is undeniable. But when we talk about what matters to American sports fans, or what's in the discussion that kind of just floats in the air, I don't know how to define this, but you know what I mean, Rob? Like what people used to say, the water cooler. Like what were people talking about around the water cooler on Monday, Bob? Like that's what people used to say. It kind of still is that, but it's obviously more disparate and more fractured because of digital media and the like. But the NFL, the NBA, if you have those teams in your town, or even if you don't, obviously college football in certain places, right? Football, basketball, baseball to a certain extent, obviously still the longest running professional sport we've got. Those things are kind of always there to grab onto as identifiers for people wherever they live. You can kind of go into any bar in the country and sit down next to somebody and be like, hey, so you see the game? And what are they going to say? Oh, yeah, I watched the Sounders last night. That was great. No, probably not. Maybe
that would only happen if they were wearing a shirt. It might lead you to believe and give you an opening, but it's not a given.
That's right. American soccer remains a subculture. And I know some of us like that, right? And raise your hand in the chat right now if you like that American soccer is a subculture and you would actually not want it to be mainstream in the way the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball are mainstream. I'd be willing to bet a lot of people. I know there's a strong streak of that in places like Detroit, Michigan, for example. Like I know there's a lot of people there who don't want soccer to be made, don't want their team to be MLS, don't want their team to be, big time because it's theirs, it belongs to them, it's special. And I get that, but so I'm, that's the thing that as the 31st season of Major League Soccer launches tomorrow, in a moment when people are very, very cognizant of how MLS has tried some things that haven't worked, right? Apple TV deal, breaking through in television. It came up with Matt Doyle when we talked to him on Wednesday. He mentioned how MLS has got to figure out how to get the TV people watching because they just haven't been able to do it. And I'm not sure they can. Like, I think this is Sisyphean. It's a good word for this. They push the boulder up the hill, the boulder rolls right back down the hill. It doesn't mean there's not growth. It doesn't mean there's not success. It doesn't mean that MLS doesn't matter on some level to a lot of people, Rob. It can. It can be just under the surface. But Stephen A. Smith ain't talking about MLS on a regular basis. I mean, I know he also might run for president, which is very scary. But do you know what I'm saying? Like this, and again, I don't know that I need MLS to be more than it is, but there's always this tension about whether MLS can break through that way. And again, Sun in LA, Messi in Miami, they're playing each other this weekend. We have these stadiums, we have new clubs. San Diego was a massive hit, and yet it still feels like MLS is always going to be a second-class citizen when it comes to sports.
Yeah, and I think that may just be how it is, really. And I really enjoyed how Matt Doyle articulated that F1 Premier League, or not F1, but Premier League, NFL, and NBA are one of the only last entities of monoculture that exists, and in every other league around the world in any sport is really trying to play catch up. But it also led me to believe does it have to be for a fan, for enjoyers of it? Like, obviously MLS is a corporate entity, and in capitalism, corporate, they want to grow and they keep on having to add, grow. But for the enjoyers of it, does it really matter if MLS gets 5 million viewers to the game?
Right. And that's an individual choice, right? It comes down to the individual person. And let me share some thoughts. So John was not raising his hand that he wants American soccer to remain subculture. John is ready for MLS and maybe not MLS. I don't want to speak for John on that level, but certainly American soccer to break through and become as big as some of these other sports and become part of the mainstream. George is saying mainstream is how we dot the map. I don't know that that's necessarily true in the short term. But over the long term, for the health of soccer, you kind of imagine it has to. But again, I think that's a closed shop. Like, I think that the theory I have about where we are culturally, and this is not just limited to sports, but where we are culturally is the things that were the furniture before we fractured into a billion media spheres, right? Before anybody with a camera and a microphone was able to launch a media channel, right? Because that's what this is. Like, we don't have millions of people watching us. We're not on the traditional legacy media outlets, but we're here broadcasting and people are choosing to watch us. That means they're not choosing to watch ESPN right now, right? That means they're choosing not to watch things that are historically much bigger and more important. So if you weren't established when the fracture happened, you ain't getting in. I think MLS missed that window. I don't know that they could have gotten through it, to be honest with you, where they were back 15 years ago, when things really started to kick off in this fractured media way. But certainly now, that idea of suddenly we're going to become part of the general conversation of sports, I just don't see it. And I mean American soccer, but I also mean even the Premier League, which gets a little drip here and there. Because for the general American sports culture conversation, the Premier League is still foreign. And it's never going to really become that. Now, the World Cup can. This is why we come back to what Pablo Maurer wrote at The Athletic. I'm sorry, at The Guardian. Let me get that right. At The Guardian about the potential World Cup bump. The World Cup, for a brief moment, like a supernova in the sky, can get some attention from the general conversation, from the people that talk about the NBA and the NFL and in Major League Baseball on a regular basis and those stories. But it will eventually fade away. I don't think it's going to be a long-term massive impact that the World Cup is going to bring all this new excitement to the domestic product. I think we are kind of locked in. It doesn't mean there won't be something, but don't look for, oh my God, so many people are coming to jump on the MLS bandwagon after the World Cup. I think those things are separate.
Yeah, in that piece, Pablo really outlined some of the thought behind why corporations think that there's this automatic bump. Like, if we invest in soccer, World Cup happens, boom, collect the underpants, sort of a formulation to it. But a lot of those metrics come from coincidentals, other things that are going on. They reference the '07 MLS season as a watershed moment after the '06 World Cup, but it also had to do with the arrival of David Beckham and the addition of Toronto FC. So there's other big things happening in conjunction. So partnering and like being in the momentum of having attention there, I think will do something. But to say it's the panacea that all of a sudden we're going to go from level 6 alert to level 10 is, I think, maybe a little bit foolish. But I think in towns that are like the teams are forming in our world, the map world, I think that people that are like have a vague idea that there's a stadium, there's a team coming, isn't there? Sure. Right? They might start to maybe do some more Googling about their local team when the World Cup comes.
Right. And I've seen some of the people I follow on LinkedIn who work in soccer media and soccer business, the soccer business marketing, things like that, will tell you that most Americans, don't live. I mean, look, we have big population centers and people do live in around cities that have MLS teams, but there are lots of people that are not represented in that regard. So that's what I mean, where that's the growth potential right now. Unfortunately, we live in this very corporatized, the media, or the way people think about launching these things is not the organic bunch of guys get together and start a team way that it could have happened 120 years ago. So that is very different. And it applies a different sort of feel to all of this. And again, we're going to talk about startup soccer here in a little bit. And that is a thing that kind of turns you off, but it's the way it has to be. Like, I don't know that there's any way around sort of what's going on here, because we are not, you can romanticize it all you want. We are not going to approximate the way that the English pyramid formed. We're just not going to happen. It's done. That is not how this works anymore. But it doesn't mean growth isn't coming. So as for MLS, again, are people aware? Are people excited in any regard? And whether you love or hate MLS, right? Certainly, I've seen Riverside Grove express this idea. If mainstream means corporate, homogenized, billionaire-centric, profit-only, and detached from community, then no, I don't want soccer to be a mainstream. Okay. Now, again, all of that is, I think, relatively fair in terms of criticisms of what Major League Soccer looks like from the outside. I would also say, though, that, again, the realities of the sports business, the realities of running any professional sports enterprise, but especially soccer, kind of need the billionaires. Like, that sucks. And again, Matt Doyle referenced Das Kapital on Wednesday, and what our feelings are about wealth disparity and things like that. But if we're talking about the livelihood of American soccer, if you want these teams to last, billionaires being involved is actually a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. And we're kind of a victim of where we're entering the place of soccer as a professional entity. Like overseas, in the Premier League, those teams are all getting bought up by billionaires and wealth funds. But that was a natural progression. It started from a grassroots thing, went all the way up. But we're starting now at that late stage capitalism part. So we're starting at the billionaire class to start these teams now. But going back to like what your opinion is and your thoughts of MLS relevance now, I think that also boils down to the animosity that some people might have with Major League Soccer. I think a lot of the time comes in areas that don't have a team. Because I'm in a state that's never had a Major League Soccer team, obviously in Michigan. And so I didn't think much of it at all until I moved to Chicago, obviously in that Major League Soccer city. And the appreciation for the league goes up when you live within there. It doesn't seem as barriers when you're there, and it feels real when you are there and an in-person experience. But with the way it's a closed shop, it seems like if you're not in those cultural centers or those population areas, then you are almost irrelevant to this league that is taking up all the corporate money.
And again,
it's taking up a lot of the eyeballs, but it isn't including all the people from all the places that don't live in those 30 cities.
That explains partly why MLS is so intent on expansion, why that's been such a driver of MLS's growth, right? And again, the allegation is, this is the only way you make money, through expansion, and that's how you pay back the previous investors through expansion. And so your business, your soccer is not really valuable in and of itself. It's the pyramid scheme, right? It's the Ponzi scheme kind of idea, right? But that is also a function. What you're talking about is a function of how MLS was not MLS, American soccer, and professional soccer was not entrenched in American identity before it came onto the scene. Like the league had to start somewhere. It starts in '96. By the time it gets to be decent enough, relevant enough, has enough excitement around it, can kind of break out of the little tiny minor league bubble where it's playing on football stadiums on artificial turf with football lines, and it starts to look decent. By that point, the club was closed, right? It was a closed shop in terms of the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, to a certain extent, hockey in certain parts of the country, obviously college football. These things had already claimed space in people's minds as to what matters. And if you didn't live in an NFL town, it didn't matter. You rooted for the team that was closest to you. I know a lot of people from Oregon who are Denver Broncos fans because they weren't going to root for Seattle because that's everybody from Portland hates Seattle, but they'll root for the Broncos because they're not that far. They're very far away, but that's what and they don't have any compunction about that. They don't think twice about it. I'm a Broncos fan. I'm not from Denver. I'm from Portland, but I'm a Broncos fan because that was the team that geographically, with my rivalry with Seattle, made sense to me. People weren't doing that with soccer because they didn't. Again, it wasn't sort of passed down. It wasn't this thing that had cultural momentum. And I don't know if there's a trick for MLS to break through in that regard, which is interesting, again, as USL goes out and sort of Johnny Appleseeds these smaller towns.
I'm curious to get this opinion. I haven't spoken to very many people that live in Nashville or Cincinnati, but what is the perspective of the teams that went from USL to Major League Soccer? Did your experience or your love for the team change in any way, or is it just a soccer team in your town and they just happen to change leagues?
And there are purists who would say, oh man, it doesn't matter. I want to root for my team, and maybe I don't want my team to be overly corporatized. I don't want to be part of the MLS machine. I don't want to be, Don Garber, all that stuff. But the vast majority of Nashville and Cincinnati soccer fans were thrilled when their team got into Major League Soccer. They were ecstatic about it. And again, you can say, well, that's not how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to win your way up. That's how we do it in soccer. It's not how we do it in America, right? You are tilting at windmills. I'm sorry. That's a fact. Now, again, we can work on a better system, and we can hope that the USL, for all their self-interest in growing this thing, is ultimately going to affect some sort of better community connection to clubs. And again, with some movement, effectuate, that's not the word, but like create this environment of it's going to feel better that my team is in the second division because I know I can win my way to the first and vice versa, right? But again, the way professional sports work in America, and this is not MLS's fault, is that franchises in a closed league represent their towns, often their regions. And if you are a Nashville fan and you were like, oh, we got a team in USL, that's great. And they said, hey, we might be going to MLS. Oh, that's way better. I want to go to MLS. Now my team has a 30,000 seat stadium, state of the art. Now we're signing guys like Kenny Mukhtar. Now we're getting in, players that, have shown a level above what I've used. I mean, again, I don't know if the quality of soccer always matters, but that vibe of MLS is the pinnacle still exists.